The passenger across from me was reading tomorrow's newspaper, but when I looked closer, I realized he had my exact face down to the small scar above my left eyebrow. I take the overnight train from Chicago to Denver twice a month for work, usually catching the 11:47 p.m. departure that gets me into the city by early afternoon the next day. It's a 16-hour journey that I've made probably 30 times over the past year and a half, and I've gotten used to the routine. Grab a window seat and coach, settle in with a book or my laptop, maybe chat with fellow travelers if they seem friendly. The train is never completely full on weeknight runs, so you usually end up with some space to stretch out and get reasonably comfortable for the long haul across the Midwest. What started bothering me wasn't the typical inconveniences of train travel, but the gradual realization that I kept seeing the same passengers on every single trip, despite the statistical impossibility of that happening on a route this long with this many stops. The first time I noticed something unusual was about 6 months ago, when I spotted a man in his 30s wearing a navy blue jacket and reading a paperback thriller. He looked remarkably similar to me. Same build, same dark hair, same general facial structure, which I initially wrote off as one of those weird coincidences where you encounter someone who could pass for a distant relative. But when I saw him again on my next trip 2 weeks later, sitting in the exact same seat, wearing the same jacket, reading what appeared to be the same book, I started paying closer attention to the other passengers around me. That's when I realized that not only was the man with the navy jacket a regular presence, but so were about a dozen other travelers who bore an unsettling resemblance to me. There was a version wearing glasses and a gray sweater, another in a black baseball cap, one with slightly longer hair and a beard, and several others with subtle variations in clothing and grooming, but all sharing my fundamental facial features and body type. At first, I convinced myself that I was experiencing some kind of psychological phenomenon, maybe the result of spending too many hours alone on these long train rides, where your mind starts playing tricks and you begin seeing familiar patterns in random strangers. I've heard about people who work night shifts or spend a lot of time in isolation developing mild hallucinations or distorted perceptions, so I assumed this was just a temporary mental glitch that would resolve itself once I adjusted my travel schedule or got more sleep. But the pattern not only persisted, it became more pronounced and disturbing with each subsequent trip. The breakthrough moment came 3 months ago when I decided to engage one of these doppelgangers in conversation. I approached the man with the navy jacket during the dinner service, when passengers typically move around the train and socialize more freely. Up close, the resemblance was even more striking. He could have been my twin brother if I had one. When I introduced myself and mentioned that he looked familiar, he responded with my exact name, claimed to work for the same company I do, and said he was traveling to Denver for the same client meetings I had scheduled. Even his voice sounded identical to mine, with the same slight Midwest accent and speech patterns. The conversation became increasingly surreal as he described details about my job, my apartment, my daily routines, and personal preferences that no stranger could possibly know. When I asked how he knew so much about me, he looked confused and said he wasn't sure what I meant, that he was just talking about his own life and experiences. According to him, I was the one who looked familiar, and he was curious about why I seemed to know so much about his personal details. We talked for about an hour, and every topic we covered revealed more impossible similarities. We apparently had the same childhood memories, attended the same schools, worked for the same supervisor, and even shared identical concerns about upcoming work projects. If you've experienced anything similar during long-distance travel, especially on trains or buses where you see the same faces repeatedly, please hit that like button and subscribe. I'm starting to think this phenomenon might be happening to other frequent travelers, and we need to document these encounters before they escalate into something more dangerous. The situation intensified when I started taking photographs of these duplicate passengers, trying to build evidence of what I was experiencing. Using my phone's camera discreetly, I managed to capture images of at least 8 different versions of myself scattered throughout the train cars. When I reviewed the photos later, I discovered something impossible. The metadata showed that several images had been taken on dates when I wasn't even traveling, some captured during trips I'd never made to destinations I'd never visited. More disturbing was that some photos showed me in conversation with multiple duplicates simultaneously, even though I had no memory of these group interactions. The timestamps indicated these group meetings had occurred during portions of trips where I distinctly remembered sleeping or working alone. I started researching the history of this particular train route and discovered it had been in continuous operation since 1962, using some of the same rail cars that had been refurbished multiple times over the decades. Railroad employment records showed an unusually high turnover rate among conductors and service staff, with many employees reporting stress-related health issues after working this route for extended periods. Several former workers had filed complaints about passenger-related incidents that sounded similar to my experiences. Reports of seeing the same travelers repeatedly, passengers who seemed to know personal information about staff members, and unexplained gaps in memory during overnight shifts. Most of these complaints had been dismissed as fatigue-related hallucinations or workplace stress, but the consistency of symptoms across different time periods suggested something more systematic was occurring. I also found news articles from the 1980s and 1990s describing occasional disappearances of passengers who had boarded the train but never arrived at their destinations, with no record of them getting off at intermediate stops. The railroad company attributed these incidents to ticketing errors or passengers changing their travel plans without notification. But family members of the missing individuals insisted their loved ones had confirmed their arrival plans and wouldn't have altered their schedules without contact. What's most unsettling is that I've started having dreams about conversations with these duplicate passengers, detailed discussions about shared memories and experiences that feel completely authentic. In these dreams, we compare notes about our identical lives, sharing frustrations about work situations, family relationships, and personal goals that are apparently universal among all versions of myself. The conversations have a quality of recognition and familiarity that suggests these aren't random dream fabrications, but actual memories of interactions that somehow occur outside my normal conscious awareness. Last week, during my most recent trip, I discovered that the duplicate passengers have started acknowledging each other's presence more openly. Instead of maintaining the pretense that they're separate individuals, several of them began referring to shared experiences and inside jokes that only I should know. The man with the navy jacket mentioned a childhood incident that I've never told anyone about, while the version with glasses asked me about a book I'd been considering buying but hadn't purchased yet. They seemed to be accessing information about my thoughts and intentions that even I wasn't fully conscious of at the time. I've been documenting everything because I believe this might be connected to other transportation-related anomalies that frequent travelers encounter, but rarely discuss openly. I understand this might sound like the ramblings of someone who spent too much time alone on long journeys. But if you've worked in transportation, taken regular long-distance trips, or experienced unexplained encounters with familiar-looking passengers, sharing your experiences in the comments could help us understand what's actually happening on these routes. Tonight I'm boarding the same train again, but this time I received a boarding pass for a seat I didn't reserve, in a car that, according to the official train configuration, doesn't exist. The ticket shows car number 13, but this train only has 12 cars, and when I called to clarify the seating assignment, the reservation agent insisted that car 13 has always been part of this train's standard configuration. More disturbing is that my ticket includes a meal voucher for breakfast service, even though this particular train doesn't offer breakfast, and the arrival time printed on my boarding pass shows I'll reach Denver 3 hours before the train is scheduled to depart from Chicago. The children's artwork covering my classroom walls all showed the same thing. Me lying motionless in different locations around the school, but I'd never assigned any project involving death or violence. I'm a substitute teacher, which means I bounce between schools across 3 different districts, filling in for regular teachers who are sick, on leave, or attending conferences. It's not glamorous work, but it pays the bills while I finish my master's degree in education, and most days are fairly routine. Follow the lesson plan, manage classroom behavior, make sure nobody gets hurt. What started disturbing me wasn't the typical challenges of working with unfamiliar students, but the way children at completely different schools began creating identical artwork without any communication between them. The first drawing appeared on a Tuesday morning at Riverside Elementary. I was covering for Mrs. Peterson's 3rd grade class, and during free art time, a quiet girl named Emma handed me a crayon drawing that made my stomach drop. It showed a figure that looked unmistakably like me. Same hair color, same glasses, even wearing the blue cardigan I had on that day, lying face down in the school library between the bookshelves. The detail was remarkable for an 8-year-old's work, including accurate representations of the library's carpet pattern and the specific location of the reading corner. When I asked Emma why she'd drawn this particular scene, she looked confused and said she didn't remember making it, that she'd just started coloring, and this is what appeared on the paper. I assumed it was just a child's imagination running wild, maybe influenced by something she'd seen on television, so I quietly disposed of the drawing and moved on with the day. But Thursday brought me to Oakwood Middle School, where I was substituting for a 7th grade art teacher, and during independent work time, a student named Marcus created an almost identical piece. This time, the medium was charcoal instead of crayons, and the location had changed to the gymnasium, but the figure was definitely me, positioned in the same face-down pose, wearing the exact same blue cardigan I'd worn on Tuesday. The artistic skill level was much higher, showing proper shading techniques and perspective that seemed beyond Marcus's usual abilities, based on the other work displayed around the classroom. When I questioned him about his inspiration, he gave me the same confused response Emma had. No memory of planning the drawing, just a compulsive need to create this specific image. The third incident convinced me something genuinely unsettling was happening. Friday afternoon at Hillcrest High School, I was covering a creative writing class when a student named Sarah approached me with a short story she'd written instead of the assigned essay. Her story described a substitute teacher who looked exactly like me, down to physical details I'd never mentioned to any student, who was discovered in the school cafeteria after hours, surrounded by overturned lunch tables and scattered papers. The writing quality was exceptional, much more sophisticated than Sarah's previous work, and included sensory details about the cafeteria's lighting and acoustics that suggested intimate familiarity with the space during off hours. Most troubling was that Sarah's story included dialogue supposedly spoken by me in my final moments, words I'd never said, but that felt disturbingly authentic, as if someone had transcribed an actual conversation. I started documenting these incidents, photographing the artwork before the students could take it home, and keeping copies of any written work that referenced my apparent demise. Over the next 3 weeks, the pattern expanded to include students at 7 different schools across all 3 districts where I work. The children ranged in age from 6 to 17, came from diverse backgrounds and had no obvious connections to each other, yet they were all producing remarkably similar content featuring my death in various school locations. Each piece showed me in the same prone position, often wearing clothing that matched what I'd worn to their school, and the settings were always accurate representations of real spaces within their buildings. What made this even more unsettling was that the quality of work was consistently above each student's normal ability level, as if they were channeling artistic or writing skills they didn't typically possess. If you're a teacher or work in education and you've noticed students creating disturbing content about you specifically, please like this video and subscribe. I'm starting to think this might be happening to other educators, and we need to figure out what's causing these. Synchronized creative episodes before the situation escalates further. The breakthrough came when I decided to visit the schools during my off hours, specifically checking the locations depicted in the students' artwork. I started with Riverside Elementary's library, arriving around 7 p.m. when the building was supposed to be empty. Using my substitute teacher keycard, which apparently works at all district schools, I entered through the main entrance and made my way to the library. The space felt different in the evening darkness, with emergency lighting casting long shadows between the book stacks. As I stood in the exact spot where Emma had drawn me lying down, I experienced something I can only describe as temporal displacement. For several minutes, I felt like I was observing the scene from above, watching myself collapse between the shelves, while children's voices whispered from somewhere I couldn't locate. The sensation was so vivid that I actually looked down, expecting to see my own body. But I was still standing normally. However, when I left the library and checked my phone, I discovered that 3 hours had passed, though I only remembered being there for maybe 20 minutes. The security footage from that evening, which I convinced the night janitor to show me, confirmed something impossible. It showed me entering the library at 7:03 p.m., but then I simply vanished from all camera angles for the next 2 hours and 57 minutes, reappearing in the main hallway at 10 p.m., with no memory of the missing time. Similar experiences occurred when I visited the other schools depicted in the artwork. At Oakwood Middle School's gymnasium, I lost 90 minutes and came to awareness lying on the basketball court in the exact position Marcus had drawn. At Hillcrest High's cafeteria, I lost 4 hours and awoke surrounded by overturned tables, just as Sarah had described in her story. Each time, the security footage showed the same pattern: me entering the space, then disappearing from all camera views, then reappearing hours later in circumstances that matched the students' creative work. I started researching the history of these schools and discovered they were all constructed by the same architectural firm between 1987 and 1994, using identical building materials sourced from a supplier that went out of business shortly after completing these projects. More disturbing was that each school had experienced at least one unexplained disappearance of staff members over the past decade, substitute teachers, janitors, or temporary workers who simply stopped showing up for work and were never contacted again. Official records listed these as voluntary resignations, but none of the missing individuals had collected their final paychecks or retrieved personal belongings from their assigned lockers. I tried to contact some of these former employees, but their last known addresses led to vacant properties, and their phone numbers had been disconnected. It was as if they'd been systematically erased from normal existence after leaving their positions. The pattern suggests that something about these buildings specifically affects temporary staff members, people who don't belong to the permanent school community. I've been documenting everything because I believe other substitute teachers, visiting staff, and temporary workers might be experiencing similar phenomena at schools in their districts. The children's artwork isn't random. It's somehow documenting events that haven't happened yet, or maybe events that are happening in parallel timelines where I don't survive these mysterious disappearances. I know this sounds like an elaborate, paranoid delusion, but the physical evidence is undeniable, and the consistency across multiple schools and age groups suggests something systematic is occurring. I understand I might sound like just a small creator trying to build an audience, but if you've worked in education and experienced unexplained time gaps, missing hours, or students creating disturbing content about you, commenting your experiences below could help us identify the scope of this phenomenon. Last week, I received a substitute teaching assignment for Monday at a school I've never worked at before, in a district I've never been associated with. When I called to confirm the details, the office administrator sounded confused and said they hadn't requested any substitute teachers for that day. But the assignment email came from their official district address, included my correct teacher ID number, and referenced lesson plans for specific classes that actually exist at that school. More unsettling is that when I drove past the building yesterday to familiarize myself with the location, I saw children's artwork displayed in the front windows that clearly showed me in various positions throughout their school. Artwork created by students I've never met, for classes I haven't taught yet, depicting my presence in a building I've never entered. According to the timestamp on the assignment email, I'm supposed to report there tomorrow morning, but the message was sent 3 weeks ago, on a date when I have clear memories of working at a completely different school. The file timestamps showed documents being modified 3 hours after I'd already left the office, but the building's keycard logs confirmed I was the only person who'd entered that day. I'm a data recovery specialist at Meridian Insurance, and I've been working the graveyard shift for 8 months now, mostly because the pay differential helps with my student loans, and the office stays quiet enough for me to focus on the corrupted hard drives and damaged servers that pile up during normal business hours. The work itself is straightforward. Companies send us their failed storage devices, and I use specialized software to extract whatever files I can salvage, then upload the recovered data to our secure client portal. What started bothering me 3 weeks ago wasn't the usual technical challenges, but the way certain recovered files seemed to change after I'd already processed them. The first incident happened with a batch of files from a law firm whose server had crashed during a thunderstorm. I'd successfully recovered about 80% of their data, including client contracts, case notes, and billing records. Standard procedure is to run a verification scan after recovery, creating checksums to ensure file integrity, then upload everything to the client's designated folder. I completed the entire process around 2 a.m., documented the recovery in our system, and moved on to the next job. But when I checked my work the following night, reviewing the upload logs as part of my routine quality control, I noticed something impossible. The file modification timestamps showed that 17 documents had been altered at 4:47 a.m., nearly 3 hours after I'd left the building. More unsettling was that our keycard system showed no entry or exit activity between my departure at 2:15 a.m. and the day shift arriving at 8:30 a.m. I initially assumed it was a server synchronization error, something mundane but annoying that our IT department would need to address. However, when I opened a few of the supposedly modified files to compare them against my backup copies, I found subtle but deliberate changes. A client's middle initial had been changed from R to M in 3 separate contracts. A court date had been moved forward by exactly 11 days in 2 case files. Dollar amounts in billing records had been adjusted by small, seemingly random percentages. These weren't the kind of corruption patterns you'd expect from hardware failure or software glitches. They were purposeful, almost surgical modifications that someone would only make if they had intimate knowledge of the legal cases involved. I documented everything and submitted a security report, but my supervisor dismissed it as a synchronization bug with our backup servers. The second incident made me realize this wasn't isolated technical trouble. A medical practice had sent us a damaged solid-state drive containing patient records, scheduling data, and treatment notes. I worked on it for most of the night, managing to recover roughly 90% of their files despite significant sector corruption. The recovery process was more complex than usual, requiring me to rebuild file allocation tables and manually reconstruct database entries. But I finally completed the upload around 3:30 a.m. Again, I documented everything properly and locked up the office. The next evening, the timestamp anomaly repeated itself. This time, 43 files showed modification times of 5:12 a.m., hours after my departure. But these changes were more disturbing than simple data alterations. Patient appointment times had been shifted, medication dosages and treatment notes had been adjusted, and several files contained additional entries that definitely hadn't been there during my recovery process. One patient's file now included a consultation note dated 2 months in the future, describing symptoms the person supposedly hadn't experienced yet. Another file contained a prescription for a medication that wouldn't be approved by the FDA until next year. I started staying later, hiding in the office after officially clocking out, trying to catch whoever was accessing the system, but the building remained empty. The security cameras showed no unusual activity, and yet the modifications continued happening. If you're experiencing something similar in your workplace, or if these kinds of unexplained digital anomalies are affecting you too, please hit the like button and subscribe. I need to know if others are encountering these impossible file modifications, because what I'm about to tell you suggests this goes far deeper than simple data tampering. The third incident broke my understanding of what was actually possible. A small accounting firm had sent us their entire server array. After a power surge destroyed their primary storage system, the recovery took me almost 2 full nights, working with terabytes of financial data, tax records, and client information spanning 7 years of business operations. I was particularly careful with this job because the firm was facing an IRS audit, and they desperately needed those records to avoid massive penalties. I completed the recovery on a Friday night, spent extra time verifying file integrity, and uploaded everything to their secure portal. Monday evening, when I arrived for my shift, I found an email from the accounting firm thanking me for the additional documentation I'd provided. According to their message, my recovery had somehow included financial records for their company spanning the next 3 years, detailed profit and loss statements, tax filings, and client contracts for business that hadn't happened yet. They assumed I'd accidentally mixed their files with another client's data. But when I checked the recovered files, I confirmed that every document was specifically about their firm, containing accurate employee names, client details, and business relationships, but describing financial activities scheduled for 2027, 2028, and 2029. The most unsettling part was how mundane and believable these future records appeared. They showed the company growing steadily, hiring 2 new accountants, opening a second office location, and handling tax work for clients who didn't currently exist, but whose names and addresses seemed perfectly realistic. I tried to convince myself that somehow I'd recovered corrupted database entries that had generated random but coherent-looking data. But the level of detail and internal consistency was impossible to explain through normal data corruption. These files contained cross-references between documents, matching client signatures across multiple forms, and financial calculations that balanced perfectly across complex, multi-year projections. Around this time, I started noticing changes in myself that I couldn't easily dismiss. I began having dreams about clients I'd never met, people whose files I was apparently destined to recover months or years in the future. In these dreams, I would see their faces clearly, know their names and personal details, understand exactly what kind of data loss had brought them to our company. More disturbing was that I started recognizing locations I'd never visited, office buildings and server rooms that existed in cities I'd never traveled to, as if my consciousness was somehow accessing recovery jobs that existed outside normal time. I'm working this job because I need the money, and the isolation helps me focus. But I'm beginning to suspect that the real reason I was hired has nothing to do with my technical skills. During my background research into Meridian Insurance, I discovered that they've employed 17 different night shift data recovery specialists over the past 4 years, and none of them stayed longer than 10 months. More troubling is that I can't find any contact information from my predecessors. No LinkedIn profiles, no forwarding addresses, no references in professional databases. It's as if they simply stopped existing after leaving this position. The building itself has a history that no one discusses openly, but property records show it was constructed on the site of a research facility that was demolished in 1987 after what official reports describe as structural integrity concerns. Local newspaper archives from that period mention briefly that the facility was involved in experimental data storage projects before being abandoned, but the details were classified and no further information was ever released. I've been trying to research what kind of experiments were conducted here, but most records have been sealed or destroyed. What I've managed to piece together suggests that the original facility was working on advanced data preservation techniques, possibly involving quantum storage methods that could theoretically allow information to exist outside normal temporal constraints. I know how this sounds, like I'm constructing elaborate conspiracy theories to explain technical glitches and coincidental timing errors. But I can't ignore the growing evidence that something fundamental about this location allows access to information that shouldn't exist yet. The recovered files aren't random data corruption. They're coherent, detailed records of events that apparently haven't happened, but somehow already exist in a state that my equipment can detect and extract. Last week, I recovered files from a damaged laptop belonging to a freelance photographer, and among the thousands of images I salvaged were photographs of me, taken from various angles while I worked alone in this office. The metadata showed they were captured last Tuesday night between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., but I was definitely alone in the building, and there were no cameras positioned where these shots were taken. In several photos, I appear to be having conversations with someone standing just outside the frame, gesturing toward computer screens, displaying data that I don't remember recovering. My expression in these images looks focused and engaged, as if I'm collaborating with another person, but I have no memory of anyone else being present. The timestamp data embedded in these photographs shows they were created using a camera model that won't be released until late 2026, and the image quality demonstrates technical capabilities that don't exist in current photography equipment. I'm sharing this because I believe other people are experiencing similar anomalies with digital information, and we need to document these incidents before they escalate further. I know I sound like just another small content creator without professional production resources, but if these experiences resonate with you, or if you've encountered impossible digital phenomena, subscribing and sharing your own stories in the comments could help us understand what's actually happening. Tonight is my last shift at Meridian Insurance, not because I'm quitting, but because according to the personnel files I accidentally recovered from our own damaged server, my employment was terminated 9 months ago due to temporal displacement concerns, and my replacement has apparently been working here successfully since last March. The really disturbing part is that I can clearly remember every single night I've worked here, every file I've recovered, every strange incident I've documented, but according to the official records, none of it ever happened. And I'm not supposed to exist in this timeline at all.